switch gears. So, one of the things that's emerged over the past several years is the centrality of sexuality and gender in mainstream social movements. So we see with like Black Lives Matter, we see the kind of a lot of intentionality put with that. That being in the forefront. And so one of the things that I think has happened as a result of these discussions that have been more mainstream is that it is, I think, created, a lot of, in some cases, division. I think when we think about like how Black people are socialized into movement work, that the centrality of sexuality and gender, and I would argue sexuality and gender that come from European cultural frameworks, right? That I find to not encapsulate truly, I think, the complexity of Black life in ways that affirm Black people. I think it's important. I think what's important about that conversation being put on the table is I'm clear that it's important for all Black people to come together regardless of sexual gender identity. And so, again, that's something that I think continues to be a challenge. So let's start with this. How would you describe the barriers that exist to Black people, again, regardless of sexual gender identity, being able to come together on the basis of being a united Black community?
You don't ask simple questions, do you? Well, that's very complex because we are living in the unresolved aftermath or current history. And what I mean by that is one of the central themes that gets in the way of Black people generally having a rational conversation around all this sexual and gender stuff is unconscious, or in some cases, conscious anxiety and concern about Black males and manhood and masculinity. I mentioned Ida B. Wells and how Black men were terrified and not able to be, quote unquote, men in a patriarchal society that values manhood but devalues Black men, and the kind of confusion that created among Black males and among Black women, Black females. What gets in the way of us simply coming together around our differences along those lines that you just mentioned is critique of people's gender performance being too feminine of a male or too masculine of a female, and things in between, or people in between. It's unresolved, unaddressed anxieties around those issues that gets in the way. And it's also rape. Mm-hmm. People have been abused by closeted, struggling people. And again, I'm talking about same-gender loving people, et cetera, right now. But that kind of rape and trauma has occurred regardless of sexuality. Right. I mean, matter of fact, if you did any kind of percentage or any type of statistical analysis, most of the rape that's going on are males to raping young females, statistically. Though there also are females who are forcing children into sexuality. There was a film called, can't remember it, but it was a film by a young brother who portrayed that. It's rarely portrayed in film, but he did it. Sorry, I can't remember his name. So that's two deep issues that the Black community has yet to breathe and say, let's go on and face this. Because the Black community before all of that was dealing with stigmaphobia, fear of being caught being Black while driving, by talking, while walking, while, all kinds of things that we was beat up, murdered, like Sandra Bland, et cetera, who was murdered because she spoke up. For those who didn't know she was murdered, people don't give you $1 million, which her family got, for somebody killing themselves in jail. You don't get no money. It's like they killed themselves next, but they got $1 million. Anyway, back to the thing. So there's these variables that get in the way of us having a conversation. As a result of the silencing of addressing sexuality and gender nuance embodied among black people, there's lots of things that black people have inadvertently done that sends black people in the arms of white people, in the arms of the Democratic Republican Party, in the arms of the LGBTQ movement, in the arms of white Jesus-faced Christianity. There's all kinds of things that we have been too anxious or paralyzed with fear or the unknown to actually just come up and take control of and manage. And as a result of that, we have people jumping ship. And sometimes if those ships are anti-black and racist, like the LGBTQ tends to be, parts of our psyche is anti-black too. Matter of fact, an effeminate male, and by the way, there are feminine males who are heterosexual too, by the way, there's a number of them, but people assume they're homosexual. But a man who's been abused both physically or emotionally, which can have the same impact, for not wearing what I call man drag. And what I mean by man drag is, walking a certain way, wearing the chains if you really into that, or wearing a certain kind of jacket even in the summer, and all of these things that we do to show up as a man, talking smack, saying I'm not gonna be disrespected, I ain't going out like that. All this insecure, compensatory man drag behavior that we do. Some brothers aren't interested in it, and they can be punished in terms of how they're treated, not necessarily always physically, but even emotionally or dissed because they're not doing the manhood thing. And it's all a performance because they ain't nothing but boys who found an outfit to wear to survive in their culture. But if we keep having these black human beings suffering in silence over being dismissed, over being oppressed, over not being seen, over being accused of something when they're really showing up as they are, being a so-called masculine female or so-called feminine male. If being black is a torture chamber, they're going to go to whiteness regardless of racism. So if we want to create the kind of unity that we need to create, we have to be thoughtful about these differences and rationally engage them. I'll give you an example of what I'm saying happening, but on the white side. When Obama and Michelle were in the White House, even though white gays benefited big time from Obama's administration, not because they loved him, but they used that bully pulpit to get some things done, they too were like, wait a minute now, these people are a huge challenge to white supremacy symbolically. They are intelligent, very capable. None of that helped black people, by the way, so don't get it twisted. But I'm talking about in terms of a prototype of an intelligent person, blah, blah, blah. And they were messing with the white supremacy narrative. So when crazy Trump came with a blatant white supremacist message, it was time to make up for lost time. And even gays, white gays, LGBT people who supported or who benefited from Obama, despite differences around sexuality, class, gender, they broke their necks running to Trump. Even though Trump was grabbing pussies and all kinds of stuff, most of the people that put him in office were white women, because white power became more important than all that stuff. And unfortunately, black people do not have the entitlement consciousness, because it's been beat down by the myth of our inferiority, to feel entitled and then get together to strategize around that entitlement toward power. But we're not going to get together, getting back to your question directly, and do what we need to do as a collective until we deal with the generational wounds and the trauma trance. Because when you're in a trauma trance, you can give somebody the best advice there is on earth, and they're intellectually here, but the behavior will deflect what the intellect is saying if it's contradicting how they personally feel about themselves. For people to be successful and want power, they got to value themselves and their people having power, and a lot of us don't. Not because we are defective, I got to say that. Not because something's wrong with us genetically, but when they blew up Black Wall Street, they put poison in the water supply of Allentown, California. They did some damage to us, and so instead of us staying focused on rebuilding, we were traumatized because we're human beings. We were traumatized, and the trauma was never addressed or resolved. And when we had people like Malcolm and others who were brilliantly speaking to, they didn't call it the trauma trance or Marcus Garvey, but they were brilliantly speaking to the side effects of the white supremacy imposed trauma trance on the black psyche and saying you're valuable. Marcus was no joke. Marcus Garvey was one of the most, don't get me emotional, I get emotional about him. Anyway, he and Malcolm, which is why they were both destroyed, were breaking the trauma trance. Martin was getting ready to, then they killed him. I say that because those are some of the high-level traumas that paralyze us into doing what you're talking about that we need to do to be healthy and powerful. Well, one of the messages that we have to put out into our community is how capable we are and how dangerous it is to have just one leader. How important it is to have multiple leaders and multiple people making strategic black power resurrection a cultural norm. Like, for example, you know, because and you probably knew before I said it, but I talk about it in my talks. I don't know no Jews who've never heard "never again," that mantra, "never again." They ain't playing. They just found a 100-year-old Nazi somewhere recently and dragged his ass to jail. But the woman who set up Emmett Till is still chilling because she has white skin, so on an unconscious basis, we're wondering whether we're worthy enough for her to not be chilling. And y'all who's listening, that we are in question about our worth is a artificially induced white supremacy trauma trance consequence. We got to understand that. And if we don't understand those kind of things, we're not going to have the kind of unity that you're talking about, that we should have, that we deserve to have, that we need to have, and that we're not having it is crazy, literally. If you read the DSM-3, it ain't in the book, but it's literally a sign of intergenerational, unresolved, acculturated mental illness on the side of black people. That's all resolvable. I got to make that clear. It's all resolvable, but the society we live in reinforces the mental illness and the disorder. One of the newest things is making sure hardly anybody black in popular culture loves somebody black. That's all part of the trauma, part of the attack on blackness, and part of the investment in disorganizing the concept of black loyalty. Because you have to have black loyalty to fight and resolve the issues I'm talking about enough to focus on getting to the core of unity toward collective power. If you're not loyal to black people and you have a white son-in-law and brother-in-law come to your house for murder the Natives Day called Thanksgiving and all that kind of stuff, then you are not really loyal. Or your loyalty is iffy, which is almost as bad as not being loyal. They know what they're doing, but we need to know what they're doing. And then we can come together. But the bottom line is the issues around sexuality and gender are focused on, among other things, the unresolved trauma of black men being lynched, black men being castrated, black men being attacked by the police, black men being mentally and emotionally and physically traumatized and attacked. And here you come and address. Now, people hear me say that and think I'm being transphobic or being, no, I'm giving you a breakdown of what's going on with black people in terms of what's happening with us. Here you come volunteering to be fucked. And here you come volunteering to be feminized. Now, I don't think that's necessarily what's going on. But again, that's complex. Right. Because there's a lot going on. But I'm talking about, for people who are listening, particularly black people, is that when we see the guy that's in the new Democratic Party commercial, we're looking at that as failure, as the failure of the black man in this context in which we live. I look at it as, it's important to articulate this, that I don't know him, so I don't know what his story is. But on the surface, I look at him as the modern version of a type of a person that actually exists among black people. However, they may be rebellious in terms of how they show up in response to the lack of active, reasonable invitation for them to be who they are.
So one thing I want to
Does that make sense?
no, that makes sense. And one thing I want to raise, because I imagine some people may hear your response and want more recognition of the violence perpetrated against sexual gender minorities, and I've been in conversations where people say, "Well, you still talking about white supremacy? That's separate from the violence that." Black trans and, black folks that are homosexual, like, so make that connection for folks who may take that position on what you just laid out.
I talk a lot, but I don't mean to. But I have to give examples.
Oh, do you think?
To make my point. Mm-hmm. But I have to preface my example with, I agree with resistance to violence to sexual and gender minorities. Mm-hmm. I agree with resistance to people in the trans community being violated or murdered and killed. I agree with that not occurring. However, my perspective is not driven by white agendas. Let me be clear. I was invited to speak at a Ivy League university in New York during Black History Month to engage the Black faculty. And in case your audiences don't know, I'm a same-gender loving man of African descent. And anybody have any questions, including you, about that, I'm totally willing to engage that, because there's a lot of assumptions, a lack of knowledge about the genesis of being who I am in the world and people like me in the world that people just don't know. And white folks have a very loud, relentless narrative that people think is my narrative too, by association. And number one, there's no association, and it's not relevant. But anyway, I had to say that. I was asked to speak at this university, invited by the head of cultural studies at this place. And I brought up my sexuality or my way of being, because it goes beyond just sexuality. I mean, even if I go in 2 or 3 years without sex, I'm still what I am. It's just to make a point. But I say that because everybody in the room assumed I was heterosexual, including the same gender-loving people who were in the room. And there was one sister in there, she was clearly caught up in it. I shouldn't use that word. She was clearly had an affinity to the white gay politics. She had on rainbow earrings. She had a rainbow belt on and all this stuff, her clothing. So I was talking about Black issues, Black history, Black behavior, blah, blah, blah. And she gets up, and she was uncomfortable with me the whole time. I mean, she could tell she was uncomfortable. She wasn't the only one, but she happened to be sitting at 12 o'clock. She finally got up and she said, brother, and brother was said in a very, very dismissive, brother, everything you said is, well, now most of these are PhDs, by the way, not all of them, but most of them are PhDs. She said, that's well and good and everything, but you forgot somebody. I said, I don't think that's true. But I knew with all of her earrings, I knew where she was coming from, but I acted like I didn't know. So, you forgot somebody. I said, no, I haven't forgotten anyone. She said, well, you haven't mentioned the queer LGBTQ community. I said, I haven't mentioned short people in wheelchairs. I haven't mentioned anybody specifically. I said Black. And that would include you, absolutely. Well, that's just your heterosexual privilege, she said to me. She said, that's just your heterosexual privilege. And the guy who invited me, who was also same-gender loving, I don't know if they knew him what he was on the camera, but he started giggling because he knew what was up. He said, that's just your heterosexual privilege. And then she got on her soapbox. She said, transgender women are killed every day in the society, and you should be a little bit more thoughtful about that. And what I'm going to say answers your question. I said, sister, and I had PowerPoint access to the internet, was able to do this in real time. I said, let's statistically look at what you're implying. And I want to underscore what you said before I make the point. You said that transgender people are killed every day, and your implication that transgender women are under particular attack and are particularly in particular levels of danger, and oh my God, we need to do something about it. And I didn't talk about it, so therefore you're critiquing my presentation. I said, before I get into my presentation, I have to demonstratively say I do not support violence or killing of trans people at all. And I'm involved in any kind of activity that's resisting that. But I don't want to see black men killed. I want to see black women killed. And I want to see black children killed. And they all have equal value to me. So I can't have one soapbox. I have a black soapbox, and you're included in that soapbox. And if I find within that soapbox that there's some particular damage being done to you, I'm going to pay particular attention. But you just got finished accusing me of not paying particular attention to trans people. So anyway, to make a long story short, the statistics showed at that time that over 1,000 black men had been killed, about 600 black women, and 18 transgender people. I said, I think if you're going to be really concerned about who is getting killed the most, you'd be looking at black men. I said, all these people are important. We won't get into children yet. We talked about these are mostly adults. I said, so if indeed, given your terminology, that a transgender person is being killed every day, it should be at least, at this late date in the month, it should be 200 of them up here, because it's been 200 days, but it's 18. Then she said the classic response, well, there's underreporting. I said, guess what? I used to work in law enforcement. There's underreporting in every single category. Let's not even talk about missing black people that nobody even talks about at all, which are in the hundreds of thousands at this point. I said, so I'm not here to shame you, and I get what you're saying, but the whole concept that trans people in particular are under duress is a white gay community politic that you've internalized. And I'm concerned about everybody black being killed. So I say that because when we don't pay attention to our community and its diversity going into year 2002, damn near 2023, and we really haven't done it yet, we're going to have black people, same gender loving and trans black people, being very emboldened because the white gay community is encouraging emboldenedness and in your faceness and coming out at 13 years old and being who you are, and they're going to feel good about somebody giving them relevance. And they're going to value the people because they have no critical analysis about racism or none of that. They're going to value getting that spotlight like the people in that Democratic Party video. They're going to value all that and brag about it, feel good about it, because they're in a trance and they're human beings who want relevance, and they have resentment toward the black community because it's an uninformed point of view that doesn't look at cause and effect. Because when I talk to feminine men or transgendered people, et cetera, about this is what's going on here, and I bring in pictures of lynchings, I bring pictures of folks being terrified, particularly black men and males, and what happened, and why there is concern about the state of black men, and if indeed they have been compromised or not. This is what's going on. I'm not saying that the reaction is all healthy or helpful, but this is what's going on. I mean, I remember one time this brother told me, he said, man, all these dykes are women who have been raped. We need to do something about these dykes. I said, what about the rape? I said, I'm not saying what you're saying is true, that they all are dykes because they were raped. I'm saying that you have no concern about the rape. And that's not even in your list of concern. You're talking about, you're concerned about there being dykes. Then I've heard people say, well, these faggots, they come from dysfunctional families or they come from a certain kind of community, and we need to do something about them. I said, why don't we do something about the community? If you create a slate of healthiness, if you create a slate of black cultural functionality, then we might see where the chips fall. But you cannot jump on people for being who they are and get mad at them if indeed your analysis is correct in terms of how they became how they are, and just traumatize them again. We can't keep re-traumatizing each other, which is what we inadvertently do in too many cases with the alleged goal of making our community better. Trauma don't make the community better. Attacks don't make the community better. Making somebody bad for who they think they are does not make the community better. What helps is to create a safe slate for them to evaluate who they are and figure it out in some ways that are not built on trauma and judgment.
Can you talk about, kind of as we wrap, some Black formations and organizations that are taking the methodology that you've laid out? Because essentially what I feel like I'm hearing you say on these questions of gender and sexuality is that we need Black affirming context in order to deal with the deeper underlying issues that we have with each other and the violence that precipitates as a result of some of the dynamics of, sexuality and gender differences. What are some Black formations or examples of activities that you've either been a part of or have observed that have taken that approach and been effective?
Well, the one I'm directly a witness of is my own work at the AmASSI Center for Black Mothers and Culture. And the results of the CTCA, Critical Thinking and Culture Affirmation Methodology, which is a methodology that focuses on the things I described, on trance breaking, getting people to evaluate themselves, using their experience and their intelligence to actually map out why they think the way they think, and separating fact from fiction, and going from having a some things I use, my mind's just I'm losing today. From an exemplary to go from faulty reasoning to exemplary reasoning. Because as you have witnessed yourself, some people who don't know what they're talking about can break it down brilliantly sometimes and be breaking it down with orator skill, and they wrong as hell. Well, that's because they have faulty reasoning. So CTCA helps people to discover exemplary reasoning, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, getting back to your question, what we do at CTCA has been quite effective and even proven so scientifically. And it was recognized by the CDC, not promoted, let me make that clear, but recognized by the Center for Disease Control based on data before they found out that I was connected to it. And other people who have used it effectively, I can't think of anyone, because what people have not been able to do is often be honest about what they're trying to do in terms of the work that I've created. And what's important is fidelity. You understand what I mean by fidelity? They need to bring fidelity to it. And you can't do a white accommodations version of CTCA. It's just not going to work. So I can't think of anyone. Mm-hmm. But what I'm glad to say, though, is that I wrote a proposal to the mayor's office for violence intervention and prevention in Baltimore that's built around the CTCA model that was funded. Mm-hmm. So we're preparing to roll out some things that we think are going to be very impactful to help turn around misdirected rage in the Black community.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something, I'm looking forward to, us having a follow-up and talking about some of the results of some of that work.
Well, we not only are you going to be talking about results, y'all going to be partnership.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Y'all going to be partners in this project. I mean, I literally wrote y'all name in the proposal. Yeah. It's right there, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, right there in writing. Yeah. So, no, you were more than just talking about how it's going to work. You're part of how it's going to work. Yeah. But a lot of my work and even my existence, there's been attempts to marginalize it because it's not white accommodationist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to say I appreciate the conversation. Like I said, we definitely need to do a follow-up, as we do the program you just laid out and really talk more about it. I think conversations around gender and sexuality that are rooted in, Black and African culture is something that, I haven't heard anyone speak to as articulately and brilliantly as you have. So really appreciate you being on the show.
Can I say one more thing before we go?
Yes, sir.
You sure?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to take up too much time.
You got it.
I forgot to mention that masculinity and femininity as hard locations in terms of human expression is European. Have you been to the continent?
I have.
If you go to Ghana, you'll see men, for example. I mean, I don't necessarily know what their sexuality is, and it's not relevant, being very affectionate. Have you seen that? Holding hands in malls full of thousands of people, having arms around each other. Now, ironically, some of that stuff has ceased because of hip-hop culture and because of United States black trauma-induced self-consciousness around not being a faggot. But before and when that is not a determining factor in the culture, they go back to being who they are. And there's men and women who are behaviorally across a spectrum regarding their so-called gender expression. I'm saying all that because it's whiteness out of some German prototypes that have led us to be caught up in you're not acting man enough, you're not acting woman enough. And even when it comes to corporate popular culture and fashion and all that kind of stuff and eyelashes and all this, everybody looks like a drag queen these days, regardless of their gender or genitalia. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Hair going all which way and eyelashes that might slap somebody in the face, they blink in front of them. All of this stuff is based on marketing, trauma-based beauty standards, and it's not African, and it's not natural. And even the hardcore fight for masculinity among black men is a defensive posture based on what we've been through in this society. It's not natural. What you see in Africa in terms of people showing affection and love for each other regardless of gender, people not walking hard and yo and all that, that's all consequential in this country based on our experience here. So I have to say that because ironically, these judgments around being male to male, being all that stuff is part of the oppressive perspective. And what's also true too is there's some people who are performing out of rebellion, not necessarily being who they really are, but they've shown up in what we consider outrageous ways because you have not created a comfort zone for them in their own community. So I didn't know if I made that case earlier, but we have to do that. And I also have to say one more thing too, since other people are going to see this beyond me. The Pride Center of Maryland is a center for everybody, people of all races, all backgrounds. Our staff represents all races and all backgrounds.
And it's the center for which you're the director.
Right. And it's important to me while I'm there, which is not going to be forever, but I'm there now, is that the organization honors that cultural diversity. But this is where the Pride Center of Maryland is different. Every other Pride Center in this country, without exception, is built on a white LGBTQ framework. This one is built on a black affirmation and considerate framework while making breathing room and affirmation room for a diversity of people in very authentic ways. And instead of being multicultural white supremacy, this is multicultural authenticity with a black backdrop. So I want everybody who's listening to know that the Pride Center is indeed multicultural and actively includes whites, Latinos, Asians, black folks, and everybody. And simultaneously that reality, this is Baltimore. Right. It's predominantly black. And what the Pride Center, which was once called GOCCB, used to do up until very recently was alienate black people and abuse black people and treat black people like outsiders, like the white gay community tends to do. And it did that up until the 2000s. And it's not like that now. Black people feel empowered, but so do the white people and everybody else. But I underscore that black people feel empowered because it didn't do that before. And that's part of how I create that healing journey among sexual and gender minorities, because I'm teaching black people to go into black spaces in ways that affirm black people, that creates authentic and rational space for the conversation. We ain't bringing in Ellen DeGeneres, and I'm saying that symbolically, and HRC, and whoever their token is that they got leading them to make it look like they're about our community. It's authentically Black. And thank goodness I'm still connected as a chief advisor to the Black Music Xchange, where I can do my black. No cultural affirmation in terms of multiculturalism, but there's multiculturalism in Blackness. So I get to do that work too. So my soul gets to. But I'm doing just fine at the price of the million too, because I am the leader of the organization. So, but I also have a shared leadership perspective. I have white leaders, I have Black leaders, I have trans leaders, I have all kinds of leaders. And we don't necessarily agree with everything each other say, but I don't want harm to come to none of them. But I do think that children should not have nothing stuffed down their throat around sexuality until they're not children anymore. They should have critical race theory or critical race fact, which should be called stuff down their throat in the third grade. But that ain't being supported, including by the LGBTQ system.
Yeah. Well, like I said, definitely we got to do a part 2. Really appreciate the work you're doing here in Baltimore. Really appreciate the perspective you bring to it. Again, like I said, the fusion of like African-centered perspective and methodology with gender and sexuality is something that I don't see enough of, and just really grateful for the fact that you do that work. So,
well, thank you for the invitation and the affirmation. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right.